Welcome back to the 27. This is a custom default setup analysis for the stock car 2019. If you're the kind of sim driver who likes wonky default setups and wrestling the cars through corners without knowing how it's going to end up, this isn't the car for you. This is hands down the most dialed in default setup for a race car in AMS2 that I have found to date. It's not even close, instantly comfortable, instantly fast, out of the box. When the multiplayer rating system comes out in Q4 and lobbies start to fill out, it would be upsetting to the sim racing gods if this series did not have at least one lobby going at all times. It would be our collective fault. So if a swarm of locusts comes through, just saying. We've made it faster though, so we're going to be talking about how even a few minor changes can unleash your inner sim racing beast. As far as the driving is concerned, it's very GT3-esque. You're going to feel a similarity in driving style. It's accessible, and just because it's a single car series and the cars don't naturally have different quirks, it doesn't take away from the racing experience. There's no need for a BOP here. Everyone is sort of going to be in the same boat, which arguably leads to more competitive racing. The biggest difference between this car and the GT3 class cars is, though, this car is stock. This is a purpose-built race car. GT3s are modeled from production vehicles, really advanced ones, but still. Just by looking at the 2019, you can tell that someone knew what they were doing here. Just the body shape itself indicates that the car is aero-oriented. A large front splitter, sloped hood, massive rear diffuser. It doesn't have any body shape nuances or weight balancing issues to deal with. Even though it's stock, I felt like I had plenty of setup adjustments to tinker with that made the car slightly better. Now, like I said, I did not think there was any problems with the default setup per se. However, just because this is the case, it doesn't mean you have to leave it be. For the stock 2019, we don't know what the spring rate is, so that means we need to rely more fully on the dampers for pitch control and ARBs for cornering balance. That's easy enough. The difficulty would be trying to determine if the car is too stiff or too soft. First, the car has to pass a feel check. If the car seems a bit sluggish or too sharp when entering wheel inputs left or right, it could be an indication of the car setup being too soft or too stiff, respectively. Another really good indicator is the tire temps themselves. I always recommend getting used to driving with the telemetry HUD. When putting a setup together, you can practice for pace afterwards, but if you recognize an issue with the car and you're trying to figure out what the problem is, using the HUD and paying attention to the tire temps usually points you in the right direction. I like to use tire temperature deltas left to right and front to rear. If the temperature differences is more than 10 degrees Celsius left to right, it's a good indication that the car is too stiff on that axle. If it's less than 5 degrees Celsius, it could be too soft. However, track conditions and track orientation will play a big role here. There is a fundamental reason why I focus on temperature deltas so much. With a stiff axle, the cars rely on the outside tire more for cornering grip. A softer axle will get the inside tire more involved, so the grip you need is spread more evenly. You can go overboard in both directions too. For a counterclockwise track, the right side tires should and will be warmer than the left-hand side, and a good target to aim for is within 5 to 10 degrees C. Being within this range means you have a good balance between stiffness and softness. At the very same time, you should be paying attention to the temp deltas between the front outside tire and rear outside tire. A rear outside tire that is 5 degrees C warmer than the front indicates that your stiffness balance between the front to the rear is on point. Please note, these are good points for tin top racing. The more the car is reliant on aero, the temperature deltas I mentioned here will be closer. So closer to 5 degrees C left to right and within 5 degrees C front to rear. So let's look at the telemetry and I'll show you what's called tire skew. Alright, here we are with Racing Sim Tools again. Up in the top left here we have the default session, and then we also have the custom session. If you can look closely, you can see that my best lap was over a second and almost a second and a half faster than the default setup here at Imola. That's informative, and all I did was some minor tweaks, but I want to focus in on a couple of things. But first, this is the new updated version of RST. This just came out this week. I'm still kind of getting used to it, so I'm sure it's going to be overload for you. So let me. The new feature is session overlays. So basically, you can look at 2 different laps at the same time. This can get rather confusing. Instead of having the data embedded in the graphs itself, it's over here. So that's gonna take some getting used to. But here we are at the tire temps graph, the time SKU, or the tire SKU chart is the second one right here, and this is what we're focusing on here. The tire SKU is basically the temperature difference between the rears and the fronts. We're just talking about that, about deltas. A temperature SKU that is higher than 0 up here indicates understeer. So the temps in the fronts are going up more in relative terms to the rear. And so we're focusing in on the entry to the Ravazza corner section, and you can see as I go through those the 2 left-handers there, the temperature SKU goes up. That indicates to me that it's understeering. So let's overlay the custom package, and you can see that the temperature SKU remains closer to the 0, meaning that we have the appropriate oversteer through that section that maintains the temperature balance between the fronts and the rears. To cross-reference this, we're going to look. Let's click that off. Let's cross-reference this with the lateral stiffness distribution chart. And I talk about lateral stiffness distribution a lot. I'm not sure if all of you understand what it is, but basically this is the chart that indicates whether or not the car is too stiff in the front, balance-wise, compared to the rear as well. So you could have an extra soft rear. It could create understeering conditions. So the goal for lateral stiffness distribution, generally speaking, is about 55%. Now this graph, they're all over the place. It's really hard to read. Imola is not the greatest track to get LSD. Well, that doesn't sound right, does it? It's not the greatest track to get lateral stiffness distribution, because you need really a slow, steady state corner where you're just cornering for a while, and then you can really get the balance. It's sort of like a track like Barcelona is good for that. That's why F1 tests there, I imagine. But you can get an overall picture at a place like Imola just by looking at the different sessions. So here you can see that the stock car 2019 with the default package, generally speaking, it stays around. Here it is, it's 57%. Here it is at 60%. Here it is at 65% and higher. So trying to bring that back, cross-referencing that with the tire SKU. Let's look at the overlay again, and you can see the blue is the custom, and you can see I brought this back into reason, and some spots were at that marker of 55, a little bit below 55%. Here's another thing I want to point out quickly is I softened up the stock car 2019, the ARBs, and you can see it's indicated here with the roll. The roll degrees with the default setup is closer to the 0 marker, whereas the roll degrees with the custom setup, you can see how it's a little bit higher on both directions. This would be, I guess, left, and this would be right-hand side turns. That's the way that works. Let's look at, finally, the time slip graph. This is really cool. I got to enable 2 different sessions. This is the default time slip, and we're going to be putting in... Okay, so which one's which here? Okay, so we're all set up here with the overlays appropriate. The green is the default, the red is the custom. So you can see here I'm gaining time during the cornering phases, and cornering exits it's carrying through. So let's focus in on one of the sectors, and I think a good one to focus in on would be the Aqua Minerale corners. So here we are, we're approaching the corner. We're braking at pretty much the exact same spot, and you can see right here the braking is similar, but the car rotated, so I was able to carry more speed through the first right and then get the car rotated, and then the same thing with the second right, more speed carried through, and that carried through the entire section. We gained from the Aqua Minerales, we're looking at time slip here 1.3 to 1.9, so we're looking at a gain of about 0.6 seconds just in Aqua Minerale. So that's the stock car 2019, just some minor changes to the balance of the car and adding a touch of softness based on what the tire temps were saying to me allowed me to extract over a second of lap time. But I have to emphasize something. Unless they are simply broken, setups don't necessarily make you faster. This is a common misconception. Setups make the cars more comfortable to let your own natural pace take over. You can focus on better cornering speeds, getting on the throttle a little bit earlier, pushing the limits. That's what it's all about. In any event, I hope you enjoy the build. Coming up, the countdown to Racing USA continues. We'll be taking our first glimpse at GT4 next, looking at the Camaro, which I've heard is a bit of a handful, so we'll see what we can do. In the meantime, thanks for watching, and take care.